What's up, summoners? King Blair here. It is buff season again, so we're going to be doing a review on the balance patch adjustment that will be coming out in 2 weeks for unit and artifact buffs. We'll talk about each of the units, how they're going to change, how I think it's going to happen later on in the meta, and some predictions of what I think is going to be pretty spicy and units to watch out for, right? So if you do like the video though, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. But without further ado, let's get right into this balance patch. As always with predictions, things can change very fast, especially because we know we're getting the Light Angelica 1 week later, and we're getting the Summer Sarah next week, so metas could change very, very quickly. But as far as the units, they did a lot of units that I think the community wanted. So I think they did pretty good as far as like the units that they buffed, right? Yes, there's no Kawerik, there's no Judge Kise, and then there's no Haste, but they did hit like Mort, and they hit Apocalypse Ravi, which were 2 units that really, really needed it. You also will see Roaming Warrior Leo, who actually currently has a recall up until the time that his buff happens, and we'll be doing a separate video on him later today to talk to you guys and walk you guys through the process of recalling Roaming Warrior Leo, if that's something you want to do. Although you should check out the buff because it's pretty nice. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with it. The artifact buffs were also very nice. I'm all for them buffing something like Secret Art Swordstone to make it less of a whale artifact. That was I'm pretty happy with. But we're actually let's just go through and talk about all the different changes. So first, we are starting with none other than Apocalypse Ravi. So they gave her something pretty interesting, right? So first, she's gonna start inflicting injuries, right? And they made the clarification that injuries are before she does damage or before healing, which I wonder if they're gonna do some attack scaling later on, like with an artifact or something. But the other part is that you do increase the injury up to 10% of the target's health. So this is a very consistent injury, and I know right now we don't have any like big injury units, right? Mort and Elnov did not really do a lot, and the injury set hasn't done a lot, but this being on S1 makes it interesting. If we ever do slow down and the meta does slow down to a point where a Ravi is around for a long time, these injuries are going to stack up really fast. Because imagine every time you counter, if you do 10% of their health, that's 10% of their health just gone, right? So it could be very interesting as like potentially the most consistent injury that we have gotten to date, right? So that's interesting, right? And it's nice that it's added to the S1. Then the other one, this one's actually the one that I think it's the more significant change for Apocalypse Ravi. It's going to be that she gets the Ravi passive, right? Every time she is hit, she gets increase of 15% CR bar, right? That's pretty nice, right? One of the problems that Ravi struggled with is that if you gave her counter set, she tended to be too slow and tended just to like kind of get ignored and not really put too much pressure on the map. And same thing with the speed build. She was a little too slow, right? With this, she can ramp up a little bit faster. If you hit her, she gets CR bar. She's able to cycle through her turns faster. If she's the last unit alive, which happens a lot more than you would think when you're using a Ravi, she's actually able to cycle and potentially cut the opponent and actually get to use the S3. And then last, but definitely not least, is the S3 change. The health percentage increase, it's not that big of a deal. They're still like basically 1 shot away from death. So it's not that crazy that they're getting a little bit of extra health. 30%, I mean, it's not terrible, right? It's like around what May Chloe does. Nothing crazy, but it's still pretty good. The part that is nice though is the extra damage that you're dealing with the S3. When someone dies, you are getting an increase in damage, and it's up to 3 times, right? So think like Ram, when someone dies, she gets the buff. Also, when someone dies, her S3 is going to be doing more damage. Now, I don't think they've mentioned how much the damage will go up, but depending on how much damage this goes away, she could be potentially very good. So the thing that people are discussing is Ravi is looking like a very solid cleave counter. Why is she looking like a good cleave counter? Well, she was already always a very tanky unit, right? Because she's a very big bruiser that scales off of health. But now that she has that extra CR push, if you make a speed Ravi, right, that is able to cut after, let's say, a Pavel. Pavel's not going to be able to one-shot her because she's pretty tanky. She shouldn't be getting one-shot by Pavel. But she will be cutting because she's going to be getting hit, which means that right after, if another of your units dies, right, to the cleaver, then you're able to come in and kill one of their squishies because you're going to be doing extra damage, which means that you're most likely going to get that secure on that cleave unit. So she's going to be like an interesting cleave counter just because of how bulky she can be and the fact that she can now potentially cut with her speed build. So as far as a Ravi, do I think this puts her like super OP? No, I think this makes her a lot better. It's not like a super OP broken change, but it's a really nice quality of life change for a Ravi. As a Ravi user, I'm pretty excited about it. Honestly, this one is the biggest one for me because I still play Bruiser. And I still like counter Ravi, and just being able to actually cycle is a lot nicer, and doing more damage of the S3 is a lot nicer, right? The injury will be interesting in the future. Right now, I don't think it's going to do a lot, but it will be interesting if we ever do get a slower meta, right? How will she do in that meta? But yeah, overall, I mean, I like it. As an arrow user, I'm happy with it. I think it gives her a role as a potential counter to cleave and aggro teams. And it also makes her a little bit scarier for the opponent if they ignore her for too long. This is 3. Should hopefully do tons of damage, right? So it's a little bit better. I like it. I like it a lot more than it is. And it fits her kit. It fits her style a little bit, right? So that's cool. Then the next one is Luna, which is one that on yesterday's stream, I thought she didn't need a buff, but I was like, I wouldn't be upset if she got one. But then I realized her banner is not that far away, right? So her banner is usually in October. So we're very close to October, right? So 2 months away, it makes sense for them to give her the buff now so people can test her and want her for her actual release. So it makes sense for Smoggy to actually do it. So as far as Luna, what buffs did they give her and is she good now? She actually looks really good for cleaving now. So let's actually go over the changes. So first, the S1 Soulburn buff. This is amazing. She always had problems with consistency. The fact that you can Soulburn this skill and get the max attack, this S1 does insane damage, right? It does upward, like it does like an S3 amounts of damage, right? It does amazing damage. And the fact that you're getting guaranteed max with Soulburn, that part, great. The other part is the increased crit hit chance and crit hit resistance. You always get it now. That's amazing, right? That's the other change I said could put Bruiser Luna back on the map, because this means that she is just naturally bulkier and it doesn't matter if she drops low because she'll always have the 100% crit rate. So again, another great change for Bruiser Luna, right? The other thing is also going to be she does still keep the attack up and the defense up when you're below 50. So she still keeps that like high mechanic and low mechanic, where more damage the higher she is, and bulkier when she's lower. So again, it's really good for both cleave and for Bruiser, because it does allow her to do both with Sigurd's Scythe. So that, again, another amazing change that she needed. But the one that I'm the most excited for, and I think it's going to be what she's going to be used for the most, is this S3, right? So what did they change about the S3? Well, she lost a Soulburn that did extra damage because they put it on the S1 for consistency, but they made this skill defense penetrate by 50%. The thing about it that you have to realize is she always attacks with advantageous elements. So she will be able to hit fire, water, earth. She's able to hit a lot of different units, and it's going to be doing a ton of damage now because you're attacking with a 50% damage penetration skill. This skill already did a lot of damage, right? It was one of the higher single target damage dealing skills, and now it only got better. One thing you also have to remember is that Luna's exclusive equipment gives her an extra turn on kill. So when you're able to kill with Luna now, you get an extra 5 souls and an extra turn, right? So you get those 5 souls. This skill gives you 3 souls. Oh no, it's only 5 souls, right? So you get 10 souls on kill, right? So what you're able to do now is if you kill a target, you get 10 souls, which means you're able to follow up with an S1, right? That makes it amazing for Guild Wars cleaving and just for arena cleaving, right? Very interesting change. Essentially, it's a self-sufficient unit that if you kill, you get an extra turn with the EE, and you're able to come in, Soulburn, and do your max attack. That's a lot of damage in one turn, right? So very good change. And they also did give her the potential to be a counter bruiser with the change to her passive always having the passive active, right? For the crit rate and the crit resistance. That's amazing. Right, so overall, she looks really good. I'm actually really excited for her. She actually looks like a very strong and viable unit for cleave and a decent unit for bruiser, right? So she'll definitely see some play, at least for Guild Wars, right? And she'll be better for what she already did. The next one is actually going to be none other than Kawerik, and they essentially just fixed the problem that he had before. I hated that we literally talked about it yesterday, but I hated that this skill was on the S3 because it doesn't make sense for Kawerik to start with the S3, right? But they changed it, so the stealth is now on the S2. That's all we needed, right? That's what we really wanted. The only bad thing is that they moved the attack buff away from the S2 and they gave it to the S3, but they gave it before he does the S3. So he won't do it functionally is about the same, but it's just the S2 doesn't set up the attack buff. It's the S3 right before you do the attack that actually sets up attack buff. So functionally it's about the same. So they fixed them, right? So essentially he actually works as he's supposed to. He opens with S2. He doesn't get attack buff right there and then, which could help against Landy, right? Because you're not putting extra buffs. And then you get stealth, which does allow you to potentially survive. And you get to S3. You get to penetrate defense. and you also get an attack buff right before. So it's a nice little change. He looks a lot better, and he kind of feels like he's going to be like Fire Kisei. If you ask me how I think he's going to be, he's a Fire Kisei that has a more reliable reset with the S2, but not as much damage as Kisei, right? So that'll be very cool. Then we have Mort. The Mort changes are a little odd, but they make sense. So first, the Soul Burn to the S1, 100% chance to hit. This is good. It's like Rem. The reason why this is good is because this S1 ignores FRES, right? When he has Rage, this S1 ignores FRES. The fact that you can Soul Burn it and get a 100% defense break for 2 turns, it's pretty good, right? It definitely does make a change. Again, think of Rem, where Rem is able to Soul Burn and get a guaranteed decreased defense on a tanky unit. Mort can do that now as well, right? The other part, that's just nice, right? And he still has the EE that can increase that chance by 60 to 65% and on counters, and it'll still work. Now, the other part that was also a nice of quality life change is that he got an innate counter attack when attacked. Why is this important? Because Mort needed to be on speed set, but because he needed to be on speed set to be able to take turns with the S3 and to make use of the speed buff, he typically got focused down really, really fast. So the fact that now you can't just focus him down without expecting a counter attack is it's pretty good, right? That's a good change. And then of course the S3 does lose the Soul Burn now, but you do get the increased damage already just naturally without the Soul Burn, right? So it should hopefully be about the same damage that he was doing with Soul Burn, which is overall a really good buff because he's just doing more damage off S3 raw. And the other thing is that he is also going to be healing more, which does let him be bulkier. So now he's a unit that can self speed buff with the S2, which is more consistent now because he's going to be countering more often. He's able to heal himself quicker and do more damage on the S3, and he's a more reliable decreased defense here. Does this make more OP? I don't think so, but it makes him not hot garbage, right? This actually makes him so he actually will probably have some roles to counter some control team since he is immune to sleep and he is immune to stun. It might put him on the map for certain counter situations because overall, it's a much better kit now. It's a much more cohesive unit. It only took an EE and a buff to put more into the not trash category. He'll definitely be functional now and might potentially actually be pretty decent for Guild Wars defense, right? That's the one that I'm kind of thinking for Guild Wars defense, since he's pretty bulky and can decrease defense. It could be good, right? Against the slower Ruel, Dark Corvus style team compositions. He could be decent for Guild Wars defense. But then we have Moonlight Leo, who is right now has a recall going on. So if you don't know what that means, is you can actually recall, get all your materials back that you use for Leo, and you can get a Moonlight 4-star selector, which it sounds amazing, but you have to realize that Roaming Warrior Leo is not hard garbage anymore. This buff is actually pretty significant, and it's gonna go really well with the new Samurai Seria, right? So I am not personally recalling mine. I am going to keep my one and only copy. Again, I'll release a video later today talking about the recall, whether or not you should recall, if you do recall, what to go for, and how to check if you have multiple copies of Roaming Warrior Leo. And you can potentially ask for another one from Smallgate, right? If you have 2 though, you should recall 1 of them if you can, right? But now, as far as Roaming Warrior Leo, so the Fire Shock Bomb is his S2. It now has a chance to decrease defense for 2 turns, right? That's nice. That is really nice, right? It doesn't increase, so let me see if they removed the increased skill cooldown by 1 turn, but they made it decrease defense, which is good because it kind of works better with what he's trying to do, which is he's a damage dealer that is inflicting bomb, right? So it kind of makes sense for him to do that. And the detonation damage still is increased. That's also really nice because you're able to actually pop your own bombs if you're able to solve them with S3. And the S3 is actually really good now because it's an AoE attack that decreases buff duration and then sets up decreased speed down, which is a really nice debuff to have on the opponent, and plants bombs that if you soul burn, again, you get an extra turn and you're able to pop that skill, right? So you're able to soul burn with S3, strip the buff duration, apply the bombs, apply the slow, get skill nullifier, and then pop the bomb, put Dicker's defense, and do a bunch of damage with the bomb explosion, right? So that's really scary. That's actually really good, right? So he actually functions as a unit now. He does have lower than average stat line because he's a 4-star, so there is still that, but he's actually a good unit. And the bomb mechanic, the fact that he puts bombs on everyone, decreases buff duration so he doesn't get countered by Fallen Cecilia, and it's an AoE attack. He will trigger with Summer Iseria, who is the new unit that's coming out next week. That also puts bombs and also detonates bombs. So yes, it's going to be a really cool wombo combo. I wouldn't recall him personally unless you had an extra copy, especially if you're planning to use Summer Iseria. It's going to be really fun, right? Bomb teams are always fun. So that's awesome. And then we have Dominiel, who got a nice little change. So first, the S1 now stuns, right? That's awesome, right? It's more of a stun mage. And you can soul burn it to get a 100% chance to stun, which again, that's really solid, right? The other thing is going to be Blizzard Cape, which is the S2. Well, what's really cool about this one, I'm going to read the Awakened version because it's super confusing, like all the stuff that they have. So basically, you get, when an ally suffers a critical hit, you get a 35% chance to activate Blizzard's Cape, and it's once every 3 turns. But essentially what Blizzard's Cape does is you get a barrier and reflect on all allies. And the barrier is proportional to the allies' max health, so tankier units will get a larger barrier. I don't know if I like that so much, since I like the old one with the attack. But what's really interesting about this is that she can potentially be an interesting counter to cleave teams. Why do I say that? Again, when you suffer a critical hit, you have a chance to trigger Blizzard Cape, which means you're putting Reflect. And if you have a very tanky penta-tank style team against cleave teams, if you trigger this Reflect, they're not going to be able to kill you without them dying, right? So it's something, right? It makes her kind of like a counter cleave control mage, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's kind of weird that it's a conditional. I wish this was just 100%, but I understand why they didn't want it, because it is a very strong buff, right? It is a very, very strong buff. Barrier and Reflect without having to take a turn is pretty significant. And then the last one is going to be none other than Ice Spear, which is her AoE attack, which is an AoE attack that has a big chance to stun, but it also does have a chance to decrease combat readiness. And you get a speed buff on Dominiel, allowing you to take more turns with this S1. So she got an identity, which I think is really cool, because she was kind of in a weird spot where, like, all she did was a stun bot with, like, some weird reflect mechanic. So now they kind of made her a support style counter cleave control mage. She looks fun. I don't know how viable she will be, just because of this not being 100% chance to actually trigger, right? That part is one of the things that, like, could be interesting, right? Could be interesting, just because it's a low percentage of happening, but if it does happen, you are getting a really nasty debuff that a cleave player is going to be really hard for them to play around, especially if you have a tanky team, right? Because they're just going to die to the reflect. So could be really strong, could be not, but overall a fun unit, and she has an identity, so I'm all for it. And then we have Mercedes, who she is scheduled to get an SC, right? So Smilgate mentioned by the end of this year, Mercedes will be getting a specialty change. And 100% she looks like she could be a very powerful unit. So first, her S1 that attacks 2 enemies now also gives a CR push. That's great for PvE. That's amazing, right? Because you're cycling more, you're doing more skills, you're doing more work. Then you have the S2. Now the S2 has a chance to dispel 1 buff. And if you have attack buff, you activate the skill again as an extra skill, right? Granted, it does less damage, but think like Vivian, right? Before, it used to be when there were less enemies, you're able to do it, but now it's just if you have attack buff. So it's more consistent, right? And it makes it pretty unique if you do give her attack buff, and she also does self-attack buff. So I think that's really, really awesome. And then you have the S3, which is now also gives support for the team, because it's an AoE attack that increases attack of everyone for 2 turns, right? That's awesome. Right? That's great. And then it does extra damage when it crits, which is why they reduced the damage off of the Molagora, was because it looks like they're putting that damage here on the critical hit chance, right? So that's why they're reducing the damage there, mostly for that. And then of course here you're losing a little bit of damage for the S2, but you're getting it more consistent and you're getting more utility with it, with the fact that you can now strip buffs more reliably. This makes her really good for A13 if you don't have a one-shot team. This makes her amazing for A13. I might actually build her just for A13's purposes, because the S2 and the S3 are amazing for the boss. Self-attack buff, strip, she's a mage, extra turns, good AoE. Just very, very solid overall. And she still has schedule for an SE, right? So it looks like with an SE, she could potentially even become very PvP viable. Right now, she's amazing for PvE, like kit-wise, but I don't think she's quite there for a super PvP viable unit. But once she gets to her SE, with how much damage she can potentially do, we could see Mercedes as a PvP unit. But that's it as far as the units. So overall, pretty good as far as the units. I'm pretty happy with it. I think they did a good job. The buffs were like exactly what the units needed for the most part, right? Like they didn't necessarily go super far off the units, but it was something that definitely helps the units out. I think the biggest ones to watch out for is actually going to be Roaming Warrior Leo because of the Sunrise area that's going to be coming. The other one is going to be Luna. I think those two are probably the best ones that they definitely did. Ravi definitely feels a lot better and could potentially have an identity, right? Which is nice. And Kawerik is going to be kind of like a Fire Kise now, right? Where if you have the good speed gear, he does pretty good damage and he can disrupt the opponent and survive and do big AoE damage afterwards. So overall, pretty good buffs, right? And the Dominiel, pretty interesting, unique aspect to her that you have a chance to activate Reflect to just completely cut out Cleave, right? That's pretty spicy. But yeah, not bad. Overall, pretty good buffs. And then as far as the artifacts, these are also really amazing, right? So first, Merciless Gluten actually is a very powerful warrior artifact. Warriors arguably had the worst artifacts, like some of the worst, with like only like very few of them being viable. But with this, what's really nice is that you get increased attack. You get increased damage with a single attack. And it says single attack. Why is that important? Think of something like Ravi. Ravi's S3 does extra damage with this artifact. Ravi's S1 does extra damage with this artifact. Luna S3 does extra damage with this artifact. Luna S1 does extra damage with this artifact, which is pretty good for Cleave Luna. And then the other thing is that when you kill with a single attack, you CR push all allies by 12%. This artifact buff really feels like it was targeted towards those like aggressive single target warriors for Cleave, like Luna, like potentially Euphine, to be able to push your Cleave up and be able to Cleave with them. This is why I think this is another thing that I think makes Luna really interesting, because not only are you getting an increased attack for Luna, a raw 16% damage increase, you're also getting CR push when you kill for the rest of your team to follow up on your Cleave, which is why I really do think she's going to be a very spicy Cleave style unit. And then of course, I'm a big fan of this buff, mainly because the part that increases when you get more artifacts is this, right? Which means this artifact is no longer a whale artifact, which was one of the things that was gatekeeping Celine from being used by everyone, because Celine without her artifact just did not feel as good, right? She was not the same unit. With her artifact, she's actually able to do her job. So the fact that you only need one copy of her artifact now for her to actually do her job is amazing. And on top of that, you get a nice little CR push when you do that, which allows your Celine to potentially cut and be able to do the S3. So big buff to Celine, indirect buff to Celine, because this was the artifact that made Celine viable. So now that artifact got a buff, she actually can potentially be a lot better, especially with all the non-attack heroes that are coming out. You could potentially do a lot of punishing with this skill, right? So again, super happy about it. And it does actually make it viable for other thieves, since you are able to potentially cut now, right? So that'll be interesting for some other thieves to potentially counter cleavers or aggro teams. The fact that you can get a CR push with a thief and get an attack buff right after, I wonder if anyone else will be able to use that. Someone like a T-Stern to potentially cut and be able to AoE attack, right? So that could be interesting. Could be nothing, right? But at least for Celine, it's a nice buff. So that's going to be for the patch review. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the changes, right? There already was a lot of really big changes coming with Samurai Seria as well as the new Angelica. So it's kind of nice that we got relevant changes for these units, but it doesn't seem like it's anything that's going to break the meta per se, right? So nothing meta breaking, just units that are actually going to be viable for the current meta, with Luna also potentially being a good counter to things like Carrot and Charlotte and other fire units, right? Because of how much damage she can do. And the Kawerik, of course. Overall, just awesome buffs. But again, the ones I would watch out for, Luna and Roaming Warrior Leo, are the ones that I feel like have the highest chance of creating a meta impact, just because Luna, being so much damage with that S3, can potentially just one-shot Carrots out the gate, right? And just more reliable damage for cleavers, especially because now you can S3, get the souls, S1, and just bop someone, right? So very nice, very nice. But that's all I got for you guys today, and I will see you next time. Peace.